Hey, this is Kyle Benedict with MISO BIM. This tutorial topic is on creating details, and this topic is an intermediate level course. Details are strictly two-dimensional and view-specific. This means, unlike modeled objects, any detail object we draw will only be seen in this particular view. If I go to a 3D view, you'll see there is no square around our space. Okay, so as you saw, I grabbed the first tool in our annotation tab and detail ribbon. That tool is, of course, detail lines. Selecting detail lines brings us into our sketch mode, where we have our usual drawing tools, and you can also choose the line style you want to use. This is just Revit out of the box line styles, but a lot of firms create their own line styles that coincide with typical line weights you'd see in drawings and also that correspond with printer outputs. Detail lines are good for anytime you need to draw an additional level of detail that your modeled objects just don't give you. I always say modeled objects are better, but sometimes there are cases where you just need to draw a detail line. But the downside to that, of course, is that it's only in this particular view. So if there's something you're constantly drawing or redrawing that's a detail, it might be better to either model that as a three-dimensional object or create a detail component. Before we talk about detail component though, let's talk about the next tool, which is your regions. You can do a filled region or a masking region. A masking region is pretty straightforward. It will mask completely an area that you define. So if we select that, again we have our typical drawing tools, and you'll also have a line style to choose from. This can be important because you could draw a masking region with defined lines, which may look like this. And we hit finish, and you can see the lines. But you can also use a masking region with invisible lines, which is very common. So we could do something like this. It's cutting right through our project with an invisible line. So that can be helpful for making a nice clean space without having an exterior perimeter line defining that space. The other type of region is a filled region. So once you select this, you're going to see in our type properties drop down, there are a few pre-made options. I'll leave it on diagonal crosshatch, which you can see is a crosshatch pattern. If we change those boundary lines to from invisible to wide, you can see it's a thicker outline around our hatch pattern. If you want to create an additional hatch pattern, we go to edit type. We can duplicate this and call it whatever we're going to name it. Let's say this one will be wood. Now that that's an option in here, we can choose a new pattern, which will open up another dialog box. And you have the option to choose between drafting or model. In this case, we'll choose wood 3. Hit OK. Hit OK. And now you've got a wood pattern. Some things to note are, again, this is view specific, so you're not going to see that in any other view except that view you drew it in. In addition, you can tell that this particular pattern is a little bit out of scale, and that is the difference between a drafting pattern and a model pattern. A model pattern always keeps things at the scale that they are in reality. So this wood board wide might be 5 or 6 inches wide. It's always going to be 5 or 6 inches wide, no matter what view scale you're in or what view you're in. If you'll see, if I change this scale from 1/4 to, let's say, 1, the pattern changes. Okay, so it's important to note that a model pattern will always be what it's modeled to be, whereas a 2D detail pattern will change with the scale of your drawing. So it's something to keep in mind as you do these. Alright, so that's a masking and filled regions. Next is detail components. You see we've got detail component, a repeating detail component, and a legend component. We're not going to touch this one today. A detail component is basically a pre-made family consisting of a bunch of detail lines. So you'll see we've got some bricks, some studs, some CMU blocks, some lumber sections, structural section, and also a wainscot detail that I just created, but I will show you guys how to make something similar. So the whole point of detail components is so you don't have to keep drawing all the individual lines of an object that you would just be copying and pasting around anyway. So rather than putting in your 6-inch studs everywhere, you can simply choose the detail component and put them in where they belong without having to draw all the individual lines. As for a repeating detail component, any detail component that is in your project can also be a repeating detail component, which is great. So a common one that we've touched on before would be a CMU block repeating detail, and we can start that, and as you move your mouse up, it creates the next object. In the properties of these repeating details, you can see the layout is a fixed distance and the spacing is set to be that exact distance between the first block and the second block. There are 4 layout options, so you can fill the available space, fixed distance, fixed number, or maximum spacing. So you can adjust those as you see fit. You can also rotate your objects. So if these were 90 degrees clockwise, it's going to rotate the detail itself, not the entire drawing. See, now the CMU blocks are turned on their side. So you have a lot of options on how to manipulate your repeating details to show them correctly. Next, I'm going to show you how to create your own detail, which can then be used as a repeating detail. So we're going to go to our R button, New, Family, and choose Detail Item. And you'll see we've just got a simple workspace with 2 reference planes. And what we're going to use to draw with this is just the lines. And we're simply going to use the line tool to create a detail. Note that detail components are an option within a detail, so you can nest detail components into your own detail component, just like you can nest models into other Revit model families. But in this case, we're just going to do a simple wainscot. I'm going to use the rectangle tool to create the shape. We want this to be 3, this to be 1.5, and we want this at the base. And this is important because as you bring this into your model, this intersection is where your mouse controls the placement of the detail. That also is relative to where, when you create a repeating detail, where the next object goes. So in this case, I'm going to have a simple wainscot pattern In fact, I'm going to change that to 2.5. And I'm going to save this as wainscot. Save over what I have. Load this into my project. Yes. Okay, so let's go to our elevation view and actually create this thing. Now, I am showing you a video on details, but in reality, we probably want to use a wall sweep to create this, and then we can put a detail component over it to create a more defined pattern. So, let's create this repeating detail component. Wainscot is here, but if it weren't, we could go to Edit Type, duplicate one, name it accordingly, and then we'll choose our detail from the list of all the details that are already in our project. So wainscot is what we want. Fixed distance 110. Want this 90 degrees counterclockwise. Hit OK. Now if I start here at this corner and go this way, you'll see it creates the pattern. And it's not going to create the next one until I have enough space for it to actually create it. So I can just stop it here. Then I can offset this a little bit from that wall. So it's evenly spaced on both sides. I'm also going to move it up a little bit because we would have some base trim down below. And then we can use some detail lines to create the trim above it. Put that at maybe 3 inches. And I could copy that down to create our base trim as well. Now again, you probably want to use wall sweep options for these particular items, but the detail component and repeating detail component can be helpful to add that extra level of detail to your modeled objects. Another thing to note when placing detail components is the hierarchy of how they are placed. So if we choose to place a regular component, let's say a couple CMU blocks, put our thin lines on so we can see these a little better. If I were to overlap these, we can change what is in the foreground and what is in the background by using the arrange option located right here. So we can choose to bring it to the front, which will bring it all the way to the front of our view, or if there's multiple layers to this, you can choose to bring it forward one object at a time. So if I choose to bring it forward, it's going to put it in front of that one, but not in front of that one. Likewise, I can send this one straight to the back, and it's going to be behind both of these. So use the Arrange tool to show your detail objects the proper way that they should be shown. That works for not only detail components, but regions and detail lines. Another thing you might want to do as you're creating details is create a detail group. Let's say this door is glass, and we have a couple glass doors within our project, and we want to represent the glass with some of those diagonal lines that often show glass as being represented by. Now, if we want to reuse this a couple times, ideally you would want to make a detail component, but another option is to select them all and choose create a group. And this will automatically create a detail group. You can say that's glass symbol. Hit OK. And now we have one object for all 3 lines we drew. And that makes it easier to copy around. That also is now in our detail groups in our project browser. So you can pull this out at any time. As usual in Revit, there are multiple ways of doing the same thing. You can choose, like I said, to do this as a group, or you can create a detail component, or you could even create a symbol right here. So choose what works best for you as you detail and as you generate your project details. That will do it for this video on details. Thanks for watching.